don't touch it. It's a red switch that alerts the fire department. Why would you put that in there? You flip it and then alerts the fire department. You're not supposed to touch it. Why would you put a switch, just a light switch? It just looks like a light switch. Why would you put that in the former principal's office where you have troubled kids going in there? I mean, I would have been flipping that switch first thing. I just wanted to do that as an adult. It drives me nuts. My desk looks right at it, and I sit there and I wonder, what if I flip that? I wonder what happens. It has been so hard to not flip that switch. And it's only because of Randy and Chris that I've not flipped that switch. I don't know if they're telling me the truth, but it's like the end of the world will happen if I flip that switch. And so I haven't flipped that switch, but it taunts me. It's painted red, and so it just sticks out. It's not even painted the same color as the wall so that it blends in. It sticks out, and I just want to flip it. But I haven't. I'm kind of one of those people, wet paint. Is it? I mean, how long has that sign been there? It may not be wet anymore. So you kind of touch still wet. My brother I remember I don't know if I was middle school, elementary. My brother was those preteen years where, it was kind of cool to wear the chains, the cheap chains that looked expensive. He had a chain that was on his dresser, and it looked like a chain. I mean, it looked like a chain, the way, it's like, that thing's got to be strong. Whoops. Guess it wasn't. I was curious. I wonder how strong this chain was. It wasn't very strong. I was really disappointed. And then I was scared because my brother beat me up all the time. If you're curious about whether you can ride a pig or not, you can't. Learned that the hard way. Cows, same thing. They don't like being ridden. They are not horses. I was curious one time, what would happen if I spit on this electric fence? Got right down next to it, let that spit come down and drip on the electric fence. That really hurts. That really hurts. Somehow I listened to my dad. My dad warned me to never go to the bathroom on an electric fence. So there's things that my curiosity kind of has a level. Like, no, I don't want to do that. But curiosity, I have been a curious person my entire life. If there's a button, I got to push it. First time I went to Becky's house, I was very polite while her parents were there. And I don't remember if it was a Friday night, whatever it was. Walked in the house, met them, and they were going to dinner. And so Becky and I were in the house together, and I started opening kitchen cupboard doors. I wonder what's in these. I wonder what other cupboards are. So I'm just looking around and helping myself, and I got to know her kitchen very well. And just like, I wonder what's behind this door. It's kind of one of those things. I came in here when I first started. I was like, what's behind this door? What's here? What's the? If you invite me to your house, I'll probably look. If you have a medicine cabinet, I will open it. So just be forewarned that, I'm just curious. I can't help myself. It's like, you get yourself in trouble. You break your brother's trains. You get paint on your finger. You get dumped in the barnyard because pigs don't like being ridden. There's all these things I kind of get in trouble for being curious. But curiosity can also be a benefit. Becky and I probably wouldn't have gotten together if we hadn't have been curious about one another and getting to know one another. You don't try new things without being curious, and I wonder what would happen if I took this job or if I tried this thing. The great inventions, the great inventors, curiosity. I wonder what would happen if I touched these two wires together. If Ben Franklin would have said, I wonder what will happen if I fly a kite in the middle of a thunderstorm. I know that's fairy tale, but we've discovered electricity because of curiosity. Curiosity can do amazing things and can do great things and can lead us to discovery and can lead us to new experiences and a new life and amazing things if we can control our curiosity, and sometimes that can be difficult. But as we look at this story of Christmas, and I'm trying to look at, when you get really familiar with stories, they can get kind of stale and they can get kind of boring. And that's kind of how it is with me in Christmas. Because it's the same story every year. And you always want the same, Christmas comes around and you have the same story, the same event every year. And how can we look at this in a new way? And how can we look at this in a different way that maybe we haven't looked at before? And that's what I'm trying to do this year with the character of Jesus, the character that Jesus brings out in us at Christmas time. And what does he bring out in us? Last week we talked about the shepherds and how they were fearless. And this week I want to talk about the wise men or the magi, or they were probably priests. But the curiosity of these wise men. So I want you to take your Bibles and I want you to turn to the book of Matthew chapter 2. In Matthew chapter 2, we're going to read the first 12 verses. It's a story of the visitors from the east, the wise men or the magi. It says here in Matthew chapter 2, he records it, like I said, the first 12 verses. Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem asking, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him." King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, as was everyone in Jerusalem. He called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of religious law and asked, "Where is the Messiah supposed to be born?" "In Bethlehem in Judea," they said, "for this is what the prophet wrote. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the ruling cities of Judah. For a ruler will come from you, who will be the shepherd for my people, Israel." Then Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them the time when the star first appeared. Then he told them, "Go to Bethlehem and search carefully for the child. And when you find him, come back and tell me so that I can go and worship him too." After this interview, the wise men went their way, and the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasure chests and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. When it was time to leave, they returned to their own country by another route, for God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. These guys have always been, a part of the nativity scene. We have three wise men because there's three gifts. We say they have camels, but they probably weren't riding camels, and there were probably a whole lot more than just the three of them. They were probably in a whole caravan. And we think that because they came from the east, they probably came from Persia. Persians were masters of the horse. So probably when they showed up, they were riding horses. There were dozens of people, not just three of them. It says in the verse there that they went to the house and they saw the child. So we can assume and we can kind of gather if they came from Persia, which is modern-day Iran, they were probably around, give or take, 900 miles away from where Jesus was born. So depending on when they saw the star, determines when they would have left, but we can know that it would have taken many, many months for this caravan of dozens of people traveling in large groups, traveling through the mountains to travel 900 miles to find Jesus. So if they would have found him as a baby, they would have had to start a year before he was born. If they found the child and they started when he was born, Jesus isn't in the manger anymore. He's with Mary and Joseph. They're in a home somewhere. It says in the text that they entered the house and saw the child. So Jesus was probably toddling around, getting into all kinds of trouble. Have you ever noticed in some houses, you remember when you had little kids or grandkids, you have your house before children, and then when you start having children, you start moving things up? Because you can't have anything within 2 feet of the ground. You know, that's probably what Mary and Joseph's house was like. Mary and Joseph, they're moving everything up, and Joseph is taking care of his tools because Jesus is getting in trouble with the tools and the woodworking and the rock working tools. You know, Jesus is toddling around, and Mary's saying, Jesus, stop that. Put that down. Stop that. They show up to the house. I look at this story, and it just blows my mind of why these people from so far away would go through all of that work and go through that effort and that time and that investment to figure out what this star meant. They saw something in the sky and they're like, let's follow that. I mean, who does that? Who just looks at something and says, I'm really curious about that. I wonder where this will lead us. I wonder where this will go. They didn't start out knowing what was going to happen or where they were going. Now, I think we can make some other assumptions that if they were in Persia, which is probably where they had come from, the Israelites went into captivity to Persia in 586. So when the southern kingdom fell and the Persians took them into exile, they would have taken them back to Persia. So when they went back to Persia, they took the story of the Messiah with them. And so there were hundreds and thousands of people that were taken back to Persia, that the story would have been perpetuated as the people of Israel who were living there still practiced their faith and still shared their stories and still had the oral traditions that impacted people around them and impacted the Persians. So that when this star appeared, they might have been familiar with and remember the stories of, these Jews said this story about this star because it comes out of, I think it's Numbers. Or there's a star of the Messiah, and I wonder if that's it. I wonder if that star is this thing that they talk about. We don't know what the star was. Theologians tell us it could have been a comet, like Halley's Comet. Could have been that they saw this unusual thing in the sky and they began to follow that. In 7 BC, there was an astrological kind of anomaly in 7 BC where Jupiter, Saturn, and the design in the sky, what are those called? Whatever you said. I didn't hear you. Pisces. So Pisces, Jupiter, and Saturn all kind of aligned in 7 BC. Now, Jesus was born somewhere between 4 and 6 BC because it says here in Luke chapter 12, or Matthew, that King Herod was alive. We know that King Herod died in 4 BC. So Jesus had to have been born before that. So in 7 BC, it kind of lines up that maybe that could be it, where this astrological thing became this anomaly in the sky that these guys thought, it's like, maybe that's the star. Maybe that's what we're hearing about. Maybe that's what I remember. Maybe that's what they were talking about. And they began to become curious about that. Or it could have been like what the Jews experienced in the wilderness, or God created this star, this visual thing that maybe they only saw, but it was something that moved and went, that it kind of appeared and like, this is kind of weird, let's follow this thing. And it just led them for the next year or two, whatever it was. We don't know. But what we do know is this curiosity that was in them was fed and was fostered. And they followed it. They followed it, that there was a cost, there was an expense to their life to pursue this curiosity of discovery. And somewhere along the way, we know it's about the Messiah because they stop in Jerusalem and they ask for directions. They ask for clarification. They asked Herod and they asked the other people, like, where is the Messiah? We've come to worship him. So somewhere along the way, they knew something about this star. They knew something about someone called the Messiah that was a part of the Jewish tradition, the Jewish faith. And all of this curiosity works together to motivate them to discovery. And I wonder about our faith and our life. And are we still curious about our Messiah? Are we still curious about Jesus? We can look at the manger and we can look at the nativity set. That if you don't have a nativity set up in your house, you need to set one up in your house. You need to set it up under your Christmas tree. This is my opinion. You don't have to do that. It's just my opinion. Set it up under your Christmas tree so that we tie the secular and the religious together. Take your little baby Jesus and put a little dot on his hand. It reminds me of Jesus came for a reason, and you can't look at the manger without seeing the cross. You can't look at the manger without seeing the cross. Jesus came for a reason. He came for a purpose. It wasn't so that we could have Christmas and give good gifts and get good gifts. That we could make our Christmas lists and we could wait in the Christmas morning and open our gifts and that we get, or even to give is a lot of. That's not why he came. So we set the nativity up under the Christmas tree. They put little marks in Jesus' hands to remind me of why he came and to focus on that. But there's a curiosity that we can get so used to the scene, and we can get so used to the season, we can get so used to, I got to get this gift, and I got to get that gift. We got more people in the family now. We had another baby. We had another wedding. We had another this. Got to run out on I'm so glad that Black Friday isn't Black Friday anymore, that you can Black Friday shop from your phone. You don't have to go get in line anymore. Remember those days where we'd go and get in line to get the good deals, and the joy of Christmas was nowhere to be found. We can get so wrapped up in stuff and things and events and activities and even going to church that we can forget about what and why Jesus came. And we can lose that curiosity. It's one of the things I love about kids. Man, they're so curious. They can drive me nuts, don't get me wrong. But I drive me nuts, so it's okay. That they touch and they taste and they poke and they prod and they ask questions, and one question after another. Well, why is that? Who is that? Where's that? When's that? It's just constant, and you're like, just be quiet. But they're curious. They don't know. They're discovering. And I wonder, church, followers of Jesus, are we still curious? Are we still driven to discover more about him? We say he's the most important thing to us. We say that we orient our life around him. But do we get into this routine? Do we get into this habit where it just becomes monotony and we've lost the curiosity, and we make assumptions about who he is and what he's done and why he's here, maybe why I'm going through this thing? Have we ever stopped to think of when we're in the midst of a struggle of asking the question, why? I remember exasperating my dad with the question, why? Well, why is this? Why is that? Why is that? And I remember it was a question about a Jeep. Why do I remember these things? It was about a Jeep and the ragtop Jeeps, and why did the friends who came and visited us, why did they dress up in their winter clothes to ride in their Jeep? Well, because the heater doesn't work. Well, why doesn't the heater work? Well, because of the engine. Well, why didn't they make a bigger heater? And I remember this conversation, my dad just saying, because I've already answered that. Okay. But we've lost that curiosity that as children can be annoying, but that's what leads to discovery. That's what leads to exciting things. In church, are we still curious about our Savior? Are we still curious about our Messiah? Are we still curious about the manger? Curious enough that we invest and we discover and we risk looking like fools. I mean, can you imagine being the wise men trying to explain to people around them what in the world they were planning on doing? Because they weren't going to set out on this trip without a plan. They weren't going to set out on this trip without provisions. They weren't going to set out on this trip without a purpose. They weren't just going to say, "Oh, well, let's just throw our go bag in the back of throw it on the horse, throw it on the camel, whatever, and let's take off." This was life and death for them, literally. But they saw the star. They connected it to the Jews, which I believe they did. They would have connected to that story of the Messiah. Let's see. I think one of the coolest, neatest, funnest, most simple calls of Jesus to his disciples, it plays on the curiosity of people when he simply says, "Come and see." I love that call. Hey, Matthew, come and see. Peter, come and see. There's a curiosity I believe is natural in all of us that God put in us. In this really simple call to the disciples of, come and see. How do you resist that call? Come and see, man, I'm there. Yeah, I can't resist that, come and see. It's fun and exciting. You know what's gonna come. You know what's gonna happen. I gotta find out. His call to us is the same. Come and see. Come and see. He doesn't lay it all out. He doesn't answer all of the questions. He doesn't. We all have questions about Jesus. We all have questions about our faith. We all have questions about following. We all have questions about the reality of it. Come and see. Come and see. Now there's a cost, there's a response, there's an investment. But we won't get answers without curiosity. We won't get answers without obedience. It's one thing I love about the first two characters. The people, have you noticed that the people who were invited to the nativity, to the manger, the two groups of people, you have the shepherds. We talked about them last week, right? The shepherds, outcasts, poor, spiritually unclean. They had no purpose whatsoever in being invited to the manger. They were Jewish. That was their only qualification, is they were Jewish. Everything else about them, they were outsiders. They were outcasts. Now we look at this second group of people who were invited to see the child. They weren't even Jewish. They were foreigners. Who knows if they spoke the same language? Who knows what they knew about? They heard this rumor, they had this connection somehow to the Jews. But they weren't even the people of God. They weren't even the chosen people. But yet God chose to reveal the star to them and called them to come and see. The people who are at the manger are the people that nobody else would associate with. But Jesus invited them. I find that really curious. I find that really fascinating. That Jesus took the people, that he didn't call the rich, he didn't call the powerful, he didn't call the leaders, he didn't call any of those people. He called the outcasts, the uneducated, the rejected, the people who couldn't offer him anything. The shepherds had nothing to give. These magi, I find this interesting too. I find this curious. The three gifts. Gold. It was a currency, but it was also a gift and a sign of royalty, a sign of kings. What was Jesus going to be? A king. Frankincense. Frankincense is the only incense that you could burn on the altar. You think these magi knew this? I think God was working. So gold, king, frankincense, priest, myrrh was an embalming incense. Myrrh was something that took odor away, and that bodies would get wrapped when they got wrapped in the cloth, and the cloth would get soaked in myrrh. I find that really curious. And I wonder, God, what in the world were you doing? These magi, they traveled for a year, 2 years, whatever it was. And the gifts that they bring, gold for royalty, frankincense for priest, myrrh for sacrifice. Everything that Jesus came for is wrapped up in those gifts. I wonder if they knew what they were doing. I wonder if Mary knew what the gifts meant. I wonder if Joseph knew. And I wonder, God, why would you do this to the little baby? Why would you? I can imagine Mary. Christmas morning, people open a gift and they go, "Thanks." It's the thought that counts. We have that internal thought. It's the thought that counts. We go, "Oh, thank you." I can imagine when Mary opens a gift of myrrh. "Thanks." An embalming incense. You trying to tell me something? Does my house stink? This thought, they're very curious, but yet Jesus knows. And I think he left the message as a breadcrumbs for us to explore and to discover and to seek and to find out who this Jesus was. Stay curious. Stay curious, church. Ask, seek, knock. That passage, ask, seek, knock, and the door will be, all of that passage, he's talking to the church. It was a message to believers. "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." It was a message to the church. Church, if we get bored with Jesus, if we get bored with church, if we get bored in our relationship, if we get bored in our routine, if we aren't curious about anything, what message are we sending to other people? People who need to know him, people who have been invited to the manger, people who are outcasts, people who don't deserve it, quote unquote. If we aren't curious about him, if we aren't excited about him, and if we give off this attitude of, how in the world will we convey that to other people? How will we convey an attitude of excitement and of curiosity of, "Oh, you won't believe what God did. It is so cool. You can't believe this." And we come up with what God has done in our life. Are you still curious about who Jesus is? Are you willing to discover, to read, to seek, to find out, who is this Messiah? Where is he? There's probably some of you right now and asking in your life, where is Jesus? Where is the Messiah? Heard about him, had an experience with him. Where are you? Are you asking that question? We tend to ask that question, I think, blaming and pointing our finger. "God, where are you?" Instead of, "God, where are you?" And he's saying, "Come and see. Come and see. Discover." One thing that never disappoints. God fails to reveal himself. He will always reveal himself. He will always show himself to the curious. I promise you, he will always show himself to the curious. So I want to encourage you to be curious. I want to encourage you to ask questions. I want to encourage you to seek. I want to encourage you to feed that curiosity in your soul. And if you don't have that, pray for it. Be honest and say, "You know what, Lord, maybe I am bored. I have lost that excitement. So routine, it's old." Okay. We've all been there. I've been there. It's okay. But to seek and ask, "Lord, I know you're speaking. Help me to hear you. I know you're moving. Help me to see you." And we start to explore that curiosity. "God, could you possibly be in this situation? God, could you meet me at Walmart?" Yep, he can. "God, can you show me? God, can you he can. It's amazing what we see and how we see things when we look at it from a curious point of view and from a view of expectancy. These magi were expecting to find the Messiah somewhere, someday. And they did. The shepherds went expecting. Are you? Are you expecting to see him? I'll encourage you to foster your curiosity. Push the buttons, turn the page, open the book, look and see what he might reveal to you, what he might show you about himself. Stay curious. Explore. Seek him. He will not disappoint you. We're going to close. And I just want to encourage you, again, maybe you just need to take a moment and just pray. And say, Lord, I want to see you in a new way. I want to see you in a different way. And then when you leave expecting to see him in curious ways. I promise you, he'll meet that need. I didn't tell him I was going to do this, and I hope I'm going to ask for permission or ask for forgiveness later, not permission. Tim Owens texted me last week, and he just said, I was fearless. And I'm going to tell your story. I hope that's okay. Saw a young pregnant couple and told them about the baby pantry. I don't know whatever came of it. If anything, it doesn't matter the response. Our response is obedience. But he got the experience of being fearless and the Spirit rewarding him and encouraging him for that. The same thing can be true for you. You go out today being curious and expecting. I promise you, God won't disappoint. And maybe you can text me this afternoon and say you won't believe it. I got a cool story. But maybe you just need to pray and say, Lord, help me to see you in a different way today. I'm curious of how you can show up this week. Let's sing.
Amen. Well, would you like to stand with us in closing? We're going to close.